Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with the best recordings of Shostakovich's 13th Symphony, Babi Yar. This, I think, is one of the all-time greatest choral works of the 20th century, one of the greatest of Shostakovich's symphonies, certainly his finest late work. It is an extraordinary piece of music in many, many respects. First of all, it was a tremendous act of moral courage to set Yevtushenko's poems, particularly the first movement about anti-Semitism in Russia, was an amazing thing. Even though Stalin had passed away, for Shostakovich to do it, to indict Soviet society in that way, and then to talk about the other ills of that society, the socialist paradise, took just an amazing amount of integrity and guts from a guy who was absolutely neurotic and extremely, well, let's put it this way. Everyone said he was like the edgiest, most nervous person they ever met. But he did it. He did it because he felt he had to do it and because it was the right thing to do. And, the history of the premiere is legendary. The authorities exerted all the pressure they could to get everybody to not perform it. Ravinsky wouldn't touch it, even though he had most of Shostakovich's other premieres, and he'd just done the extremely trashy 12th Symphony. But eventually, Kirill Kondrashin took it on. They had to find a bass soloist. Most of them were pressured into quitting, but they found one who would sing it. And it was performed a couple of times and then immediately banned. And that was it. And then Rostropovich smuggled the music out to America, where Eugene Ormandy gave the premiere and recorded it as well. A very good performance, by the way, but not one of the ones we're going to be talking about here. Because for this talk, I have chosen my 7 top performances, the ones that I just think you have to have, or else life is meaningless. And you've got to hear these. They're fantastic. But I want to talk about the piece and from a couple of different perspectives. First, there's the marvelous poetry. It really is. There are 5 movements. The first describes the massacre at Babi Yar and discusses anti-Semitism in Russia through extremely vivid imagery, as you will hear. The second describes humor, how humor is sentenced to death as a political prisoner, but no matter what the authorities do, humor always survives to ridicule their pomposity and their evil. It's a wonderful, wonderful movement with a wonderful moral to the poem. The third movement is called At the Store, and it describes the burdens of Russian women lining up, waiting for the meager rations that are available, and how they have suffered and borne the burden of Soviet life for generations. The fourth movement is called Fears. It's about the Stalinist terror and about the fear of denunciation, of people turning themselves in, of the collapse of society when everybody is afraid of everything. And the final movement, the most wonderful of all in some ways, is called A Career. It's about how the great men, Galileo and Tolstoy and others, were persecuted, but their art lives on. They gained immortality, and as Yevtushenko said, because they were not careerists. He says the last line is, I follow my career by not following my career. In other words, I gain my immortality by being true to myself and not seeking to stand on the shoulders of others and to pander to the powers that be. It's just the most wonderful, wonderful symphony. And then the very end has one of those hypnotic, gazing out into eternity type endings that Shostakovich was so good at, that we hear in the 15th Symphony and the 4th Symphony and the 8th Symphony. Those quiet, calm, desolate, haunting. And it's just incredible. But what's so incredible about the 13th Symphony isn't just the poetic text or the backstory, which really is a fabulous backstory, but it really has nothing to do with the music. I mean, the music itself is what makes this great. And despite what many have said, it is a genuine symphony. It depends on very, very closely argued thematic development and transformation. And I want to talk about those because nobody ever does. The thing with Shostakovich that makes me crazy, and when I wrote my book about Shostakovich, I talked about this too, is that everybody wants to know the story behind the music, and you wind up with all kinds of biographical garbage and trivia, but no one talks about the music as music. Why is it great music? It's not great music because the poem Babi is about anti-Semitism or political oppression or anything else. It's great music because it speaks true emotion, the emotion of terror in the first movement, and hilarity in the second movement, and desolation and fear and horror, and finally tranquility and immortality in the finale. It does all of these things, and it does it in a purely musical way, and it does it through a symphonic process. That is thematic development and the transformation of themes from one emotional state to a completely different emotional state. I mean, that's what the great symphonies do, and that's what this symphony does. And I propose to show you how Shostakovich does it, or some of the ways, because it's an incredibly rich piece. And I can't go into every detail of it, but I just want to sort of point the direction, because I know some of you love it, and I wonder just how many people have listened to it as a symphony and said, wait a minute, what's going on here? What is Shostakovich telling us at a deeper level, even beyond the poetic text, by taking the same themes and motives and giving them different meanings as the work progresses? It's a fabulous thing. So I have 11 musical examples here, all taken from this marvelous performance that I've been using throughout this series, because this is one of the most consistent, if not the most consistent, symphony cycles out there. It's fabulous. The Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, Vasily Petrenko. On Naxos, the soloist is Alexander Vinogradov. The bass soloist with men's voices of the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Choir and the Huddersfield Choral Society. Very, very nicely done. A wonderful performance. And we're using this for our musical analysis, and it's also one of my 7 recommended performances, not surprisingly. So let's get right to it. Now, the first movement is in a very, very classically poised sonata form, for all that the text is horrific and terrifying. And the opening has, well, basically there are 3 ideas that we need to take from this movement that are going to serve as the basis for the rest of the symphony. The first is the very opening idea, which you might call the Babi theme. It begins with the tolling of a bell. And Shostakovich understood, as Mahler did, that you could make an entire web of thematic resemblance and illusion simply by using a timbral cue, such as the tolling of the bell. That bell will come back in every single movement, one way or another, and the minute you hear it, it ties the whole symphony together. Just with that simple bong. It's amazing how well it works. And then you have the Babi theme. And that is a motto. It's the symphony's motto. It's going to recur in one way or another throughout the entire work in various guises. So first, I want to play you idea number 1. Let's call it the Babi theme, so that you get it into your head. Listen for that soft bell sound in the background, and then just the dark, sad, plodding, desolate character of that. It's amazing music. It's just amazing music. Here it is. Okay, now, the second idea that is going to permeate the symphony is the actual music that the choir sings, which is above Babi, there are no memorials. It's so gripping. It's incredible and so dark because it's written for a bass soloist and a male chorus, which sings entirely in unison until the end of the third movement. And that gives the music some of its primal power and quality. It's a tremendous thing to hear. So here is the second idea, and remember this theme. It's operates over a very narrow musical range. Da 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 ya da 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 da. That's basically all you need to keep in mind. Remember particularly this oscillating between a couple of notes. Da 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 da, like that. It's wonderful. So here is the opening melody sung by the chorus. Let us call that the theme of remembrance. Why not? Because the text is above Babi there are no memorials. We'll call that the theme of remembrance because the first one is the Babi motto theme. So we have to characterize them somehow to make the conversation easier. Now, the third theme is menace, hostility, and viciousness and stupidity and all of the negative, awful things that human beings can do to each other. It's the description of a pogrom and just a violent attack on the Jewish community. And it begins with drunken louts, with the stench of alcohol and blood on them, attacking innocent women and children. And it's so graphic. Here is that music. And again, the thing to keep in mind is the kind of music it is. It's this rhythm, oompa, 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 da-da-da-da, oompa, 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 da-da-da-da. It's unforgettable. And just think about it as that sort of just vulgar popular music in the most primal sense. Here's that moment. So these are the three basic themes that Shostakovich is going to work with throughout the symphony. And I don't even need to play the rest of the first movement, which is just unbelievably intense and terrifying, with a central development section that is hair-raising in its intensity. You can listen to that for yourself. I want you to understand how these themes evolve throughout the symphony. So we need to move on. Now, the second movement, as I indicated, is called Humor, and it's based on essentially the first idea, the Babi motto, but more than that, the menace theme, the oompa theme. Remember how that went? It was just sort of oompa, 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 ba-da-da-da, like that. So I'm going to play you a little example that gives you that original thing and then what it becomes in the second movement. And you have to remember, it's about humor. So what Shostakovich is doing is mocking that idea. But you can tell the derivation really, really obviously because it's just a simple rhythmic boom, 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 boom between two notes with a little hooji in between phrases. Da-da-da-da. In this case, do-do-do-do. It goes the other way. But it's the same idea. Here it is. Happy, friendly, spiky, one of the great transformations of musical ideas, but it's clearly the same kind of musical idea. Now, as humor has his way with people and the authorities try and repress humor, at one point he is summoned to be tried, rather like Till Eulenspiegel, and to be hung. And when that happens, as judgment is passed, or is going to be passed, the actual Babi Yar motive returns. And so I'm going to play you basically the whole Babi Yar motive as we heard it in the first movement, and then the way Shostakovich perpetuates a burlesque on that same idea. It's very, very clear. The derivation is very easy to hear. And if you put them right next to each other, of course, it's even easier. So here is that marvelous moment. Now, since this is a scherzo, that return to the original Babi Yar motive represents the trio section, the middle section of the scherzo. And in the middle of the middle section, there is a wild dance, a whirling dance, which actually comes from another piece entirely. It comes from Shostakovich's cycle of 6 romances to English poets by Raleigh, Burns, and Shakespeare. And the poem in question is, I believe it's the third in this number, but it's called Macpherson's Farewell by Robert Burns. And the text is basically, I mean, it's in Scottish dialect, but it's, he sang, he jumped, he danced around the gallows tree. Macpherson is about to be hung, and he does a mad jig in front of the gallows or underneath the gallows around the tree in which the gallows is constructed. And of course, this is all sung in the romance, in the song. But I want to play you first the waltz, as Shostakovich has it in the symphony. It's not a waltz. It's not in 3, but that doesn't matter. And here is the actual romance. In this case, let's see, which one is this? This is Mikhail Jurovsky and the Cologne Radio Symphony Orchestra. Let me see who's singing. It's Stanislav Suleimanov, singing quite marvelously. Macpherson's Farewell. Here it is.
Весело, отчаянно шел к виселице он. Последний час, последний пляс пустился Макферсон.
So those of you who know your Shostakovich will know that tune has some rather appropriate words set to it. And it's just a wonderful use of that same melody. And there's a lot of this in Shostakovich. And there's quite a bit of it in the symphony, by the way, borrowing from some other works, some motives and ideas. But that's the only one I'm going to bring up now. The others you can figure out on your own as you explore Shostakovich. But basically, the rest of the second movement consists of a reprise of the first section. And it ends with a wonderful crack on the whip and a ba-da-dum-bum-bum, boom. It's marvelous. Humor conquers all. And that is part 2 of the symphony. Now, in part 3, in the store, we have what seems like a whole new world opening up. And it really isn't. It truly, truly is not. What's fascinating about it is that the last 3 movements all run together. They're consistent. They run one after the other. And this is something Shostakovich did quite a bit. He did it in the Ninth Symphony, you may recall. The last 3 movements also all run together. And, no 2 Shostakovich symphonies have exactly the same form. It's one of the most fascinating things about him. He never repeated himself structurally in writing a major work, not even in the bad symphonies, the ones no one likes, like the 12th or whatever. They're all somehow different in the arrangement of movements and the structure that he employs. So for this particular song about the burdens of Russian women, and they're queuing up in front of a store with this wonderfully desolate sound of a woodblock and castanets as they stand out in desolate lines, just going click, 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 with the time ticking away. It's so powerful. I can't even begin to describe it. You have to hear it. But the third part begins with this incredibly dark, gloomy theme in the basses. It is, in fact, a development of the Babi Yar theme, not the motto, the memorial theme, the theme of remembrance. Da, 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 da. Well, here it's ba, da, 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 da. But it's clearly related to the theme of remembrance. And that theme is going to undergo, I think, one of the most wonderful transformations in all of music. Anybody's music. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. This is because it becomes the theme of the finale. And you're just not going to believe. I have it here with them next to each other so that you can hear them. It is just the most amazing moment. Listen to this theme as it begins the third movement, and then as Shostakovich transforms it at the start of the finale. Isn't that amazing? I get chills whenever I hear it. I really do, because you'd never notice initially that pastoral flute theme is, in fact, that forbidding, dark, heavy theme in the cellos and basses that begins the third movement. It's extraordinary. And from this point, I just want to talk about the finale because like I said, these movements are all run on. There will be a huge recurrence of the Babi Yar motto in the fourth movement at the climax of Fears. But the finale is a true summing up of the entire symphony. It's a rondo. It's a classical rondo, formally speaking. That is a theme with various episodes, and then the theme returns. The main theme is, as I played you, the remembrance theme, the initial mention of Babi Yar, transformed into a sweet pastoral lullaby in the two flutes. But the first episode talks about how Galileo was put on trial and treated like dirt, but now he is the one who had the last laugh. And that music is set to a transformation of the menace music the pogrom music that we heard as the sort of second subject of the first movement and the beginning of humor. And now it's music of sheer mockery. But again, you hear it when the chorus comes in, that chomp, 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 that sort of thing. It's extremely memorable, and once pointed out, again, I think the resemblance is fairly obvious, and you can hear how Shostakovich is working with his material in the most marvelous way to give it additional shades of meaning. It's not just a pogrom. It's not just bloody menace. There's coarse humor, and then there's mockery of human stupidity. It's so wonderful. Here it is.
Tвердили пастыри, что вреден, и неразумен Галилей. Неразумен Галилей, что неразумен Галилей.
And then another of the episodes is a fugue, an actual fugue, a really serious fugue, one that becomes rather threatening, actually, because the subject of the fugue, which is bum, 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 ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, bum, bum, such as like that, and it goes around, it does fuguey things, the voices enter one after another, and it becomes more contrapuntally complex. That is a transformation of the remembrance theme yet again, but a different version of it. Remember, da 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 da. Well, imagine it is ya da 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 da. You just speed up and diddle the note values, and voila, you have a fugue subject. But I want you to hear the fugue and how it rises to its climax. It's only about a minute long and becomes, for a moment, really scary. The point, of course, of writing the fugue is that Shostakovich is saying that he is going to pursue his career as a composer and write a fugue by not pursuing it. In the last stanza, he rejects that sort of the artifice of composition to go directly and entirely for truth, emotional truth and direct musical expression. And that is what the symphony is about. And that's what makes it so heartrendingly beautiful and meaningful. So here is the fugue. Now, these are just some of the ways in which the themes of the symphony become transformed as it plays. But it's incredible how much emotional intensity and variety Shostakovich gets out of his basic material. And not only are the individual movements in fabulously wonderful classical forms, which never once suggest that they aren't appropriate to the setting of the text. I mean, it's not like they fight each other. They're cooperating. They're like this. So you've got a sonata form, you've got a scherzo and trio, you've got a double largo or a slow movement with a slow introduction to the finale, which is an allegretto in pure rondo form, with all of the themes related and transformed. I mean, it's just such a miracle of compositional genius. So it's extraordinary. It's just extraordinary. And I'd like to talk about some recordings of it now. The fact of the matter is, there are very few inadequate recordings of this symphony. There are a few. Some are better than others. You'll have your favorites. I picked 7. I picked the 7 because I think it's enough And these were the ones that really grabbed me. And I'm sure there are others that will grab you too. But I would ask, because I know when we talked in the comments, you mentioned the ones that you like or that you have. I would love to see some sort of acknowledgement of the fact that you've listened to some of these that you haven't heard before. I mean, listen to some that you don't know. Don't just tell me the one you have in your collection, because I've heard it. I guarantee you I've heard it. And probably a bunch of other people have too, or they have the one that they've heard that you haven't heard. Listen to the work and listen to multiple versions of it, because it really, really repays that kind of listening. So the first recording obviously was this one, the Petrenko recording on Naxos, which, as you heard, is excellent, absolutely first rate. But we need to talk about 6 more. We cannot discuss this symphony without talking about the extant recordings by Kirill Kondrashin, who conducted the premiere. Now, these are typical Russian stereo, 1960s. Kondrashin recorded the symphony, but he recorded it formally in a revised version that added a couple lines to the first poem and changed a couple other things around. And that was considered, most people prefer the original, as Shostakovich said it, because the revision was forced on Yevtushenko because the authorities were so unhappy that the poem was about Jews, which was a big no-no. And it didn't talk about the fact that there were more than 34,000 Jews killed at Babi Yar. There were also Russian prisoners of war and other people like that. The Germans did it. It wasn't a Russian thing. And, it was such a political bit of bullshit. But so Yevtushenko changed the poem. And Kondrashin's recording, his formal official recording, is of that revised version. Not that we're going to notice, because they're all screaming at us in Russian, so it doesn't make much difference. But there is a Kondrashin recording of the unrevised original version. There's just an odd provenance from it. It appears that there was a second performance before the piece was completely banned, and the recording exists, and it's in here. It's in this 12 CD alto Shostakovich cycle, a mixed cycle with different performances by different people, which is for the most part quite a fine cycle, by the way. We'll have to do a talk about it individually at some point, but for the moment, it has that Kondrashin Shostakovich 13th in it. It was also released originally on Russian disc. Remember those like blue compact discs? I don't know if that one is still around. Now, the sound is not great. It's okay. It's decent, mono-ish. Maybe it's stereo. I don't know. You can't tell. It's tolerable, and it's an incredibly gripping performance, as you might expect, especially for that dark choral singing of the Russian male choir. And Kondrashin's interpretation is always urgent. He doesn't dawdle anywhere. So Kondrashin we must discuss, and that's the version to get, the one on Russian disc, not the Melodia conventional one. But there are also others that are so good now. I'm not sentimental, as all of you probably know. I don't believe that there's like one recording from 19 Blicky sound that nothing comes close to. It's just nonsense. There are at least half a dozen, if not more, superb recordings of this piece, and in modern sound with really great singing and conducting, and they're just as gripping. They really are. I mean, this one has Kondrashin always has a certain authenticity, and that's a wonderful quality, but there are other better musical qualities than that. And so one that I think is liable to be overlooked, but which is quite wonderful too, is Maxim Shostakovich. This is his recording with the Prague Symphony Orchestra, with a fabulous Czech choir and a first-class soloist. Let me see if I can find out who the soloist is. Who is it? Is it Mikhail Rysov or Peter Mikulash? It's one of those guys. One of them does the 14th Symphony. Let me tell you who it is. He deserves to be mentioned. Hang on one second. 8, 9, 13. Here we are. Number 13. Peter Mikulash. There we go. Fantastic bass soloist, and it's really an extraordinary performance by the composer's son. A live recording, very, very intense and wonderfully done. So that's worth having. Also, first class in every respect is Mark Wigglesworth on Bis. First of all, the sonics are just fabulous. This is with the Netherlands Radio Philharmonic, and I think the soloist is Jan Hendrik Rudering, if I'm not mistaken. But let me make sure again. It's always good to get the details right, because if I don't, you're all going to yell at me. Jan Hendrik Rudering. I got it. Yay! First-rate performance. And Rudering isn't Russian, but boy, has he got a gorgeous voice. I mean, he sings this so beautifully. Quite often, the bass soloist can be a little gravelly. And also, in the lower register, sometimes you can't even tell that they're like singing definite pitches. It gets very hard to sort of tell what the notes are, but Rudering is just beautiful. Also a superb soloist in a new recording is this one with Ricardo Muti and the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. Now, Muti has a real feeling for this work. I saw him conduct Philadelphia in Carnegie Hall doing it, and it was wonderful. Wonderful performance. This is a slow performance in the first movement, but very gripping. And of course, you've got the Chicago Symphony and the Chicago Symphony Chorus, who are splendid. It's really first class. And the soloist here is Alexei Tikhomirov, who's terrific. Absolutely terrific. And this came out quite recently, and it's absolutely marvelous. So Muti and Chicago on their own label, CSO Resound, definitely worth considering. But there are two that I just think are the ne plus ultra of Shostakovich 13s, of Babi Yar symphonies. One of them is Barshai on Brilliant Classics. This one, does this tell you who the soloists are? Of course, they wouldn't do that, would they? That would be much too kind and simple for us. So let me tell you, hang on a second, who the bass soloist is. Here we go. It is Sergei Alexashkin. That's who it is. He's the bass. Now, why is this such a great performance? Quite frankly, because the opening movement is the most terrifying thing I've ever heard in my life. It is absolutely horripilating. I mean, it will have your hair standing on end. The whole symphony is great, but the opening of the first movement, I played it for my friend. I remember my friend Christophe Huss, who is the music critic at Le Devoir in Montreal. And I played it for him. I said, you got to hear this. He listened to it. He just looked at me and said, it is death. And I said, yes, it is death. That is what it is. So Barshai, I mean, you just got to hear with the Cologne Radio. It's WDR, right? Yeah, Cologne Radio Symphony Orchestra. It's astonishing. It's just an astonishing, harrowing experience. Absolutely marvelous. However, if I had to pick just one, which thank God I don't have to do, of this miraculous symphony, Haitink, the Concertgebouw, and I can't even see, it's so tiny. There's no way I can even see who the bass is, although they write them down. It's down here somewhere, and I'm going to have to just, oh boy, oh dear. It's just not fair. Why do they do this to us? I mean, it's cruel. It's heartless to not be able to read anything on here. This microscopic, I know I'm bitching. Marius Rinzler. Thank you. It's Marius Rinzler, an unbelievably great chorus, and the Concertgebouw at its absolute best. And Haitink, there's something about Haitink who just responded to this kind of music, this deep, dark music, that it balances the need for savagery with the most heartfelt, intensely moving lyricism, which you really need in the second half of the symphony. I mean, the second half of the symphony has the big climax at the end of In the Store and at the end of Fears. There are two big climaxes, but basically it begins to become more lyrical. The music is going to be transformed from the rigid horror of the first movement or the brittle humor of the second movement and become more human and more open and more heartfelt and more emotionally giving. And Haitink just nails that stuff. I mean, some people might find, because the first two movements are so noisy and brilliant, that the last three are a bit of a letdown because they're so hushed and so dark in places. But this is a performance that doesn't stint in any way on the thrills of the first two movements, but really makes something special, something concentratedly, emotionally intense of the last three. And that's what makes it so special. So Haitink and the Concertgebouw is my choice in Babi, or even better than Kondrashin. Not as raw, maybe, not as Russian sounding, but more musically moving. Ultimately, because of that, I think that's my opinion. And so, in saying that, I would like to leave you with the very end of the symphony, the final transformation of the memory, the memorial theme, into a rippling solo on the celesta that gradually becomes fragmented, breaks off in mid-phrase, and then trails off into infinity with nothing but that last chime of the bell, the same sound that got us started, echoing off onto the horizon. Here is the end of the Babi Yar Symphony. Keep on listening, folks. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care.